Hello, Dave here. Welcome to Learn JavaScript with me. We're going through the book exercises and learning some JavaScript. And the book is Modern JavaScript, Develop and Design. It was written by Larry Ullman. A good book. I picked it up off of Amazon. So far, so good. Just this video will be finishing up chapter 7, which takes us into functions. So we're actually starting to do some real coding now. So it's kind of intro to functions, but it's kind of getting us somewhat intermediate. But once again, modern JavaScript, develop and design. If you're more interested, please visit larryullman.com. Okay, so there's our book. And what I'm using here is using for a browser using Firefox. And Firebug has been the tool of choice, or the tool of my choice, wonderfully helpful. And I've created on my local XAMPP server, I'm calling it my showcase, and this is where I have all of our exercises, or all the exercises I've done so far, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. And they're also available for you if you want to go out, debug away. And it's in js.davecoast.com. So created a little subdomain out there. And you can also get to it by going to my davecoast.com. And on the nav bar, there's the Learning JavaScript button here that'll take you to the same location right here, js.davecoast.com. So enjoy. Hopefully that'll help you out a little bit. And it's forcing me to go through all these exercises. And by putting them out there, really helps reinforce what I'm doing with them. So let's go ahead and go back. Our exercise for closing up chapter 7 here is anonymous functions, and it's redoing chapter 6. So I'll bring up from out here, chapter 6, the add employee object. Oh, not the add employee object. Let me go back to chapter 6. It's the enter tasks into an array, right? And it looks pretty much the same. The only difference is how we structured in there. We're going to look at the code, but let's go ahead and start first by bringing up Firebug. And I'm going to detach it from the bottom there so that we can see. And I'll just move it up here a little bit. And this way, it's a bit more visual. We have two sections here. Notice I'm in the console mode, and we can enter commands on this side and see the results on this side. So we're talking about functions, and we started out in function 1. We talked about the basic function syntax. So to create a function, right, we can just type function, right, function name, and I'll call it function name demo, and then parentheses and squigglies. And that is our basic function syntax. And various people have different ways of actually structuring it, putting the squiggly at the bottom. But now we can put in here some form of code. I'm just indenting it. And I'm going to go ahead and say console.log. And here, use a little escape character here, so I can put apostrophe in there. Here's some text. Close that off and use an apostrophe. And this is creating a function. So if I go ahead and say run, notice that over here, it created that function. It's all in blue. So now I can go ahead and execute that function. So I can call function name demo, and the parentheses. The parentheses is for arguments. And we talked about arguments, I believe we did talk about it in number 1. In number 1, we talked about the basic syntax, arguments, and we created a simple example. In number 2, we returned values from functions. In number 3, we talked about variable scope. In number 4, we talked about a function as an object property. which makes it a method, so creating a method. And now in 5, we're kind of wrapping it up by talking about the anonymous function. So just starting out, here's our basic function. I can execute it. And here's one of the beautiful things about this tool in the console thing here, right? If I highlight this code here and I click run at the bottom, it's only going to execute my highlighted code. Whereas if I don't highlight that, it'll execute all the code. So let me click run here, and you'll see that here is some text. There's that console log message. So if I don't have anything highlighted, and I say run, it recreates it and ran, here is some text. So taking that another step forward, let's go ahead and put an argument in here. And I'm going to go ahead and call it argument test1. So I created this function, and here is some text. But I'm going to go ahead and say, let's do another console.log arg passed is, close the quote or close the apostrophe, plus arg test1, and let's go ahead and close that, put an apostrophe there, and let's go ahead and put a new line in here just to make it a little easier to see. So I'll use an escape and N for new line. So again, I'm recreating this function name demo. I can give it a different name if I want. If I run that, right, here it is in blue, so I don't have any errors, then I can go ahead and run it. But I'm going to run it. Let's give it an argument. And our argument is going to be, this is the demo argument. Or for us old schoolers, parameter. Right, so here's, and I did something wrong here. Arg test 1. Okay, so right, shows us a reference error. 4 out of range 3. Let's look at our code here. Oh, look at that. It would help if I could type correctly. So this is arg test 1. So let's recreate that. And I'll highlight that code. Click run. It recreated it. Let's highlight this code here and click run. And we see here is some text, line break. Arg passed is, this is the demo arg. Okay, so very straightforward. And that's what a basic function looks like. Let's go ahead and clear this out of the way. Now let's take it one step further. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just copying in some code. And if we look at this code here, notice that now I got a parenthesis here. Here's the close of that parenthesis, and here is an external parm. So what this is an anonymous function. It does not have a name, and it's to be executed immediately by wrapping it in these quotes and putting the function down here. So let's start out and look at just the raw code here for a second. Let me just clean that up a little bit there. And the raw code for this is open parenthesis, the keyword function, parentheses, squigglies, right? Then whatever, right, you would put your slash for a comment here, code goes here, and it ends with that closing parenthesis, not a squiggly, a parenthesis, and the function execution parentheses right there, right? So here is how you code execute immediately a function that is anonymous. And the only thing that makes it anonymous is that it does not have a name. And because we don't need to refer to it by name, it's very common when you assign a value, when it's assigned to a variable, or it's assigned to an object property, or it's passed as an argument. So that's why it's being introduced here, and this kind of solidifies our knowledge of it. So my example up above, I went ahead and put an argument in here, and I call it arg1, right? So here's our function keyword, and there's some demo text, and I'm showing that arg1, and I show here's the external parm that is being passed. So now when I run that, here is some demo, right? Test text, and I'm just doing the /n for the escape characters, right? And escape character to put an apostrophe inside apostrophes, right? Test text for you to see. The argument passed as external parm. How's that? Right? And I could change this to other values, right? Demo value for the fun of it. And if I go ahead and click run, it runs away. So once again, you see right here's some demo test text for you to see. The argument passed is demo value for the fun of it. How's that? Yippee-ki-yay. Important thing here is anonymous function executed immediately, and that's what we're going to be looking at in a moment when we look at the actual code. But once again, right, so it starts out with parenthesis, the function keyword, parentheses, squigglies, close that original parenthesis, and then argument parentheses. So there's our anonymous function to be executed immediately. And that's all well and good. We'll go ahead and clear that. We'll clear that. We'll go ahead and reattach this to the bottom. I'll turn off Firebug for a moment. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at the code behind the exercise right here. Remember, we didn't really change much from chapter 6. In fact, right, if I look at it in chapter 6, right, I type task 1, task 2, task 3, right? I can hit the button a bunch of times, right? It added a whole bunch of task 3, right? And the whole part of this exercise was actually creating an ordered list and putting actual HTML into what we're sending out back to the screen. Okay, all very slick and very and nice and fun, but we did it using a global variable, and we also did it using functions that weren't wrapped inside each other. So this way we're wrapping the entire process inside a function so that all of the variables are internal. And speaking of the, let's take a look at one more thing in Firebug here. And I'll bring this back up. And I have one other example that's worth seeing here. And let me just copy this code in here. Right, so I'm just declaring a global variable here, and then here's our immediately ready to process function, no argument, right? So we just closing those guys, and we have a nested function in here, And the idea here is just looking at variable scope. Key piece of the puzzle and a key piece of understanding functions is that we try to avoid these global variables because they are part of obviously the parent, or which is the window in this case, right? So that's a global variable. It's always available and it's always part of memory. This way we clean up after ourselves. So variables created inside this function are only noticeable within this function. Whereas variables created in this function, right, the outer function, are available to its internal functions. And so I just did a little example here, and let me go ahead and run it. And we can see the code here, right? So here's the function. I just did a console log. I can see the global variable, right? So here's the global variable. This is available to all, right? And then I created a local function1 local variable, right? And notice that there's no function name here. So they are anonymous functions, right? And I can see this function1 variable, right? And then from the nested guy, I can see all of the variables, right? So now that I've actually run that, right? If I come down here and I do global var1, right? And run that, oh, look at that. I see this is available to all, this global variable. Now, if I do func1 local var, right, which is defined here inside this function, and I click run, undefined. It is not defined. It doesn't know about it because we're not in this function. It is only available when that function is executing. And that's the whole purpose of understanding the variable scope. So I'll go ahead and run that one more time with the function2 local variable, which was created here, right? So let me highlight that. I can run that, see, and that's undefined. And if I don't highlight anything, right, let me clear this out here, right? I can run the whole thing and you can see, ooh, right? Here it did all of those guys and it stopped here when it hit the error on that function2. Okay, so that's what we wanted to learn. We're going to take a quick look at the code behind this exercise here. We'll look at it in the editor. And we're going to wrap up chapter 7 here now that we have a pretty good understanding of functions. So in chapter 6, and the changes here were actually fairly simple, right? We created this array, right, because it's got the brackets, and that array is a global variable. So it is going to exist even after this script is done running. Then we created a function to add the task, and it adds these tasks, and that's how we see them down there. But it adds these tasks, and we wait for that submit button and start off at the very bottom with the window.onload event, wait for the task entry button, and do the onSubmit event to execute the add task function. So that was chapter 6. Okay, good exercise. And the key here was showing us how to put this HTML, right, into our actual back out to the page, which we do with this inner HTML method. Okay, very nice, good exercise. Now in chapter 7 in functions, notice that we wrap it. Here's that immediately executable, right, anonymous function. And that's why I showed the basic code here, right, because you see there's those brackets, right? So everything is wrapped in this function. And now this variable, tasks, which is an array, is not a global variable, but it's part of this anonymous function. and this function is nested within this function. This function is nested at the same level as this function within this anonymous function. And this statement, the onload event, wait for task entry button, execute that function, right, is part of this function also. So anonymous functions, immediately executable. The Firebug console, best way to get comfortable with it. This Dave at davecoast.com. Please let me know any comments, questions. Can I make it clearer? Hopefully, we know a little bit more JavaScript, and we've learned some JavaScript together. Thank you very much for watching.